My name is Jessica Monroe. I'm 29 years old, born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and 1 month ago, I inherited $20 million. But don't get the wrong idea. This isn't some fairy tale about luck or lavish parties. No, this is a story about betrayal, legacy, and the kind of family secrets that don't stay buried. It all started in a sleek downtown Dallas law office where I sat sandwiched between relatives I barely recognized. Folks who hadn't bothered to visit Grandpa in years suddenly dressed in black, pretending to grieve. James Blackwell, my grandfather's attorney for over 3 decades, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. To my beloved granddaughter Jessica Monroe, I leave the sum of $20 million. The air left the room like someone had cracked a window at 30,000 feet. My father's pen snapped in half. My mother's fake smile died mid-twitch. Cousins leaned forward like I'd just announced I found oil on our ranch, then came the switch. "Jessica, sweetheart," my mother cooed, grabbing my hand like she hadn't ghosted my last birthday. My father leaned in, voice low and rehearsed. "We should set up a family trust, discuss allocations." But I wasn't that girl anymore. Because what they didn't know was that Grandpa left more than money, he left a plan, and I was ready to finish what he started. This was just chapter 1. You'd think growing up in Highland Park, the Beverly Hills of Dallas, meant I had the kind of childhood most people dream about. Private schools, summer camps in Aspen, holidays with monogrammed napkins and 7-course dinners. On the outside, we were the picture-perfect Southern elite. But inside our house was colder than a January blue norther. My parents, Richard and Valerie Monroe, were born to perform. My father, a third-generation investment consultant who liked to call himself a wealth architect, spent more time polishing his Rolexes than parenting. My mother? She could have won an Oscar for Best Southern Socialite pretending to care. Her days were filled with charity luncheons, garden club meetings, and perfectly staged Instagram-worthy brunches where no one actually ate the food. At our house, everything was curated, down to the throw pillows no one was allowed to lean on. But nothing was real. I remember once, when I was 7, I got sick at school. Fever of 103. My teacher called home 3 times. No one picked up. I ended up sitting on the nurse's cot until nearly 6 p.m., wrapped in a damp towel and sipping a Capri Sun someone else's mom brought me. When my parents finally arrived, my mom barely looked at me. "Jessie, baby, couldn't you have waited until after the luncheon?" That's when I knew I was a prop in their stage play, a well-dressed accessory to the Monroe brand. Now don't get me wrong, I had food, clothes, a roof over my head, and access to every opportunity money could buy. But none of it came with love, with attention, with real connection. And I learned early how fake wealth can feel when it's not wrapped in warmth. There was only one person who saw through it all. My grandfather, William Bill Monroe. He didn't care for showmanship. He wore Levi's and boots until the soles gave out. Drove a Ford F-150 that he washed by hand. Said you could tell a lot about a man by the way he maintained his truck. Grandpa made his money the hard way, brick by brick, nail by nail, starting from nothing but a shed and a pickup crew in Abilene. By the time I was born, Monroe Development Group had contracts across the Southwest and was worth hundreds of millions, but he never flaunted it. He took me fishing at Lake Texoma, taught me to patch a flat tire, and told me why you never trust a man who wears Italian loafers to a job site. "Money's a tool, Jess," he used to say, "not a trophy." He was the only one who came to my school plays, who remembered I loved frogs, not dolls, who didn't roll his eyes when I said I wanted to study environmental science instead of business. By the time I was 12, I'd already figured out how different I was from my family. While my parents were hosting New Year's parties for Dallas's top donors, I was in the garage with Grandpa, building birdhouses out of scrap wood. I never fit their mold, and they never forgave me for it. At age 18, I got into the University of Texas with a double major in environmental science and wildlife photography. My parents tried to bribe me into changing majors, offered me a Tesla, a shopping spree in LA, even a condo in Austin. I turned it all down. That night, my father called me ungrateful. My mother cried into her wine glass, telling her friends I was going through a phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was me. After college, while my peers slid into cushy corporate jobs their parents handed them, I went off-grid. Traveled across the Rockies, spent 6 months in Montana documenting endangered wolves, and even lived in a yurt in Alaska for a while, tracking bald eagle nesting patterns. I supported myself through grants, freelance photography gigs, and eating more canned beans than I care to remember. And through it all, Grandpa watched from the sidelines, never judging, always encouraging. He sent handwritten letters with $100 bills tucked inside, labeled, "Not for bills. Use this for joy." Meanwhile, my parents kept pretending I didn't exist, until it was tax season and they needed a dependent deduction. Back in Dallas, their lives looked picture perfect. They had a 6,000 square foot home, drove Escalades, summered in the Hamptons. But behind the marble countertops and wine cellars was a house of cards, built on borrowed money, leveraged accounts, and backdoor favors Grandpa had covered for years. He never told me that. Not then. Not directly. But looking back, I saw the signs. The late-night calls where he looked exhausted. The way he'd changed the subject when my father's name came up. The way his eyes darkened when he opened letters marked "Final Notice." He was carrying the weight of everyone's bad decisions, except mine. I remember our last Christmas together, just the two of us at his ranch outside Waco. He made chili from scratch, I brought gingerbread cookies shaped like owls, and we sat on the porch watching the stars blink into existence. He handed me a box wrapped in newspaper and twine. Inside was a worn leather journal and a brass key. "Your inheritance," he said, eyes twinkling. Not the money, the story. I didn't understand what he meant. Not then, but I would. And when the day came, sitting in that office with all those vultures pretending they cared, I realized just how deep Grandpa's plan ran. He didn't just leave behind a will. He left behind a reckoning. And I was the one holding the match. Real love doesn't show up in photo ops or engraved bracelets from Neiman Marcus. It shows up in muddy boots, late-night phone calls, and the way someone remembers exactly how you take your coffee. One cream, no sugar, even when the rest of the world forgets you exist. That's the kind of love I had with my grandfather, William Monroe. And it was the only real thing I could ever count on growing up in a family full of people who smiled for the camera but blinked right past you in real life. Grandpa wasn't the hugging type. He didn't get emotional or preach wisdom from a rocking chair. But he showed up, over and over again, in ways that mattered. When I was 9 and got bullied at school for bringing a frog to show and tell, he didn't tell me to be more ladylike like my mother did. He took me to the pond that weekend, helped me build a better habitat, and told me, if people are afraid of what you love, maybe they've just never had anything worth loving. I never forgot that. While my parents were busy curating the perfect Christmas cards, matching flannel pajamas and fake snow flown in for the front lawn, Grandpa and I were building bird feeders out of leftover pine and peanut butter, hanging them in his backyard just outside Waco, watching cardinals flutter like little red miracles. He didn't believe in waste, not of time, not of money, not of people. "Everything has a purpose, Jess," he told me once while patching a leak in his barn roof. "Your job is to find it and not let the world convince you it's worthless just because it's different." That was the year I decided I wanted to save endangered species. Not because it sounded impressive, but because someone had to see value in the things the world kept pushing aside. Grandpa saw that value in me before I ever did. He was the only one who celebrated when I won a statewide junior wildlife photo contest. Drove 6 hours round trip to see my work hanging in a gallery in Austin. Bought the first print I ever sold for $50, not because he needed it, but because he wanted me to believe it mattered. And when I told my parents I was declining the VP internship at Monroe Development Group, my dad lost it. "Do you have any idea what people would kill for that position?" he shouted across our kitchen, his cufflinks clinking against his Scotch glass. "I'm not people," I told him. "You're throwing it all away," my mother whispered like I'd just been diagnosed with something terminal. "For trees? But Grandpa?" He just smiled when I told him, said, "Sounds like you finally figured out the map in your own compass." That summer, I couch surfed across 5 states photographing mountain lions and prairie dogs. I lived off granola bars and truck stop coffee, slept under the stars more nights than I could count, and every week, without fail, a letter would arrive at whatever P.O. box I'd forwarded from my last spot. Always handwritten, always with a little folded bill inside, and always signed the same way. "Proud of you. Keep going. G." He never asked for updates, never tried to redirect me, just believed. I didn't know it at the time, but he was giving me the kind of freedom most people spend their whole lives searching for. Freedom without conditions, love without strings. And when the world went quiet, when assignments dried up or publishers didn't call back, he was the one who reminded me that my value didn't come from being impressive. It came from being real. As Grandpa got older, our conversations changed. They got longer, more layered. He started sharing things I wasn't sure he'd ever told anyone, not even my dad. About the sacrifices he made starting Monroe Development. About losing friends, missing birthdays, burying his own pain to build something permanent. He talked about my grandmother, the woman he said taught him that love isn't what you say, it's what you do daily when no one's watching. He never once blamed my father for being the way he was. But I could hear the weight in his voice. "I gave your dad everything too early," he admitted one night watching the fire pit flicker. "Figured if I handed him the keys, he'd figure out how to drive. Instead, he just looked for shortcuts." He paused, looked at me. "I'm not making that mistake again." At the time, I thought he meant with the company, with the will. But now, I know he was talking about trust. He trusted me to carry something forward that wasn't about profit margins or legacy dinners or quarterly projections. He trusted me to carry him, his values, his story, his intention. And when the cancer came, fast, mean, with no apology, I put my work on pause and moved back into the ranch house just like that. No debate, no doubt. My parents visited once a week, always with their lawyer, always circling like hawks, asking about the estate, asking if Grandpa had made decisions yet. They called it planning. Grandpa called it what it was, scavenging. "They want the money," he told me one night, skin pale, voice thinner than I'd ever heard. "But they never earned the heart behind it, and that matters more." I held his hand. "You don't owe them anything," I whispered. He smiled. "No, Jess, but I owe you the chance to do better." And so, as his hands weakened, mine got stronger. I made soup, read him weather reports, showed him new prints from my field camera trap series, laughed when he mocked hospital food, cried when I heard him whisper my name in his sleep. I was there the night he died, holding his hand, listening to the sound of his breath slow to silence. And in that stillness, I didn't feel loss. I felt a handoff, a passing of the torch. He had built something out of sweat and sawdust. Now it was my turn to build something real out of love. If there's one thing the Monroe name guarantees, it's options. Private jets, Ivy League connections, executive positions you don't have to earn. It's like being handed a keychain full of doors that the rest of the world has to break down just to peek through. But I didn't want doors someone else opened for me. I wanted to carve my own path through the wilderness, even if I had to crawl. That's why, when I graduated from the University of Texas with a dual degree in environmental science and wildlife photography, I did the unthinkable. I turned down the Monroe Development Group's executive fast-track program. They offered me a six-figure starting salary, a company car, an office with my name already on the frosted glass. All I had to do was smile, shake hands, and pretend the world wasn't burning outside those climate-controlled boardrooms. I remember the day I said no. My father stared at me like I'd just slapped him. "This is a mistake," he said flatly, like it was a line from a legal brief. "People work their entire lives for what you're walking away from." "I'm not people," I replied. "I'm me." He slammed his whiskey glass down hard enough to crack the coaster. My mother burst into tears, but not the kind that comes from heartbreak. It was fear, social fear. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" she hissed. "You'll embarrass us. The board? The foundation donors? No one cares what I do," I interrupted. "They only care about the illusion you built around our last name." They called it rebellion, but for me, it was survival. I moved out of the Highland Park estate that same week, packed my camera gear, a sleeping bag, and a $1,000 Canon lens Grandpa gave me for my 21st birthday, moved into a second-floor walk-up in Denton with my best friend Natalie Clark, who, by the way, was the first person in my life who never asked about my last name before asking who I was. Our place didn't have central air. The kitchen sink leaked. The neighbors played country trap at full volume on Tuesday nights. But I loved it. It was mine. I picked up freelance gigs shooting engagement photos, local nature reserves, and wildlife rehab centers. Most weeks I was lucky if I cleared $800 after expenses, but every photo I snapped of a bald eagle in flight or a rescued fox pup being released back into the wild felt worth more than any corporate bonus check. I wasn't building someone else's empire anymore. I was building purpose. I applied for grants, entered competitions, and even worked nights at a local feed store just to afford gas for my fieldwork. I wore duct-taped boots, carried trail mix in Ziplocs, and kept my gear in the trunk of my '08 Jeep Cherokee, which rattled every time I hit 60 miles an hour. But I didn't care, because every ounce of effort was mine. Meanwhile, back in Dallas, my parents played damage control. They told people I was taking time to find myself. They told the board I was exploring the philanthropic arm of our family's mission. They even photoshopped me into the annual Christmas card, claiming I was on assignment in Patagonia. Truth was, I was tracking a family of coyotes outside Amarillo. They had no idea what I was doing. And worse, they didn't want to know. Because if they had to confront the truth, that I was happy outside the bubble, they'd have to admit the bubble wasn't paradise. One night, about 8 months into my fall from grace, I got a call from Grandpa. "Where are you now?" he asked. "New Mexico," I replied, holding the phone with one hand and swatting mosquitoes with the other. "Camping near a desert spring?" "Trying to get a shot of a pronghorn migration." There was a pause, then laughter. "Of course you are." He didn't ask why. Didn't tell me to come home, just said, "I hope you brought sunscreen and a good tent." That call stayed with me, because it reminded me that one person in this whole world understood. He wasn't disappointed, he was proud. He always believed that real success wasn't about resumes or revenue. It was about alignment. Living a life that lined up with your values so cleanly that you didn't have to keep explaining your choices. You just lived them. Still, not everything was romantic. There were nights I questioned myself, nights I ran out of money. Nights I wondered if I was stupid for throwing away the security blanket everyone else was clawing for. But each time I came back to one thought: security without purpose is just a pretty prison, and I had no intention of locking myself in. So I kept going, documented everything from monarch butterflies in East Texas to threatened salamanders in the hill country, wrote articles, hosted a small YouTube channel, even got a feature published in a conservation journal Grandpa subscribed to for 30 years. He sent me a screenshot with one sentence: "Didn't I tell you the compass would work?" I didn't know it then, but he was preparing something big, watching from a distance, taking notes. Planning a legacy not based on tradition, but on transformation. He knew what my parents refused to believe, that sometimes the best way to honor a family name is to redefine what it stands for. And when the time came, when the estate was divided and the vultures circled, he didn't pick the loudest or the most polished. He picked the one who had spent years in the wild, learning what truly matters. And that was me. It started with a voicemail. "Jess, it's Grandpa. Don't panic, but I need you to come by the ranch. Tomorrow if you can." He never left voicemails, never said "don't panic," unless he knew I would. My stomach dropped the second I hit replay. The next morning I drove 4 hours west to Waco. His truck was still in the driveway, same sun-faded red F-150 that had hauled lumber, rescued strays, and carried me to every county fair from age 5 to 16. But he looked different when he opened the door. Smaller, like something invisible was pulling him inward. We sat in the den, where the air smelled like cedar and dust and old memories. And he said it plain. "It's cancer, Jess." 3 words, no emotion, just facts. Pancreatic. Stage 4. They caught it late. He wouldn't see another Christmas. I didn't cry, not yet. Because he didn't need tears. He needed someone who wouldn't flinch. I moved in that weekend. Natalie packed up my apartment and promised to send supplies if I needed them. I told her I wouldn't be gone long. I lied. Those final months became our last great adventure. Without leaving the house, I cooked every meal from scratch. He hated hospital food. We built puzzles, watched nature docs, laughed at reruns of Andy Griffith, and argued over whether pecan pie was overrated. He insisted it wasn't. He was wrong. I set up a bird feeder outside the kitchen window so he could watch the goldfinches in the mornings. Installed a baby monitor by his bed so I'd hear him if he needed anything during the night. He'd always been the oak tree in my life, unshakable, firm, and a little rough around the edges. Now he was still solid, but weathered. You could see the years in the way he walked, the way he winced when standing up too fast. But his mind? Still sharp as a blade. He started telling stories I'd never heard before. About his first job sweeping out barns for 50 cents a day. About the time he almost lost the company because he trusted the wrong contractor. About my grandmother, the one who taught him how to plant tomatoes and be patient with stubborn people. And about my father. That's where things got complicated. "Your dad was smart," Grandpa said one night while sipping chamomile tea from a mug that said "Best Grandpa Ever." But he wanted shortcuts, fast wins, flash over substance. He stared into the fireplace like it held answers. I tried to guide him, give him responsibility, but I also gave him too much money, too early. Figured he'd grow into it. He never did. He paused. And now he's drowning in debt he won't admit to. Borrowed against assets he doesn't even own anymore. I said nothing, just let the weight of that truth settle between us. Later I found stacks of letters from banks, collection agencies, even lawyers. My parents had been using Grandpa like an ATM for years, pulling, withdrawing, draining without ever looking back. I wanted to confront them. Demand answers. But Grandpa stopped me. "No explosions, Jess. Let time sort the truth." Instead, he wrote. Every day he filled pages of a leather-bound journal, his memories, regrets, hopes, and what he called the instructions. "Some of it's legal," he said, "some emotional. All of it's yours when I'm gone." He also gave me a key, small, brass, unmarked. "You'll know when to use it." I kept it on a chain around my neck like armor. Meanwhile, my parents visited twice a month, always dressed too formally for a man in hospice care. My mother brought soup she never cooked and monogrammed blankets he never used. My father brought paperwork, always paperwork. "Just getting things in order," he told me once, flipping through estate documents like he was finalizing a real estate deal. Grandpa would wave him off. "There's time," he'd say. "Sit down and talk to your daughter." But he never did. One morning, Grandpa asked me to wheel him outside. He wanted to watch the sunrise from his old rocking chair on the back porch. I wrapped him in 2 blankets, poured hot cider in his thermos, and sat beside him as the Texas sky turned from bruised purple to fire orange. "Jess," he said quietly, "you know how I said I trust you?" I nodded. "I mean it, and when it all goes down, and it will, don't back down. They'll try to twist your spine until you fold." He reached for my hand. "But I didn't build you to fold." I squeezed back, throat tight. "You built me to fight." He smiled. "Exactly." He died 3 days later. I was holding his hand, reading him the weather report, rain coming in from the west. He always liked knowing the forecast. His last words? "Tell the truth, then live it." The funeral was a circus. Lavish flowers, a eulogy from a cousin who hadn't spoken to him in a decade, a jazz quartet hired by my mother because he liked music. He liked Merle Haggard and the occasional Willie Nelson ballad, not saxophones. My parents turned it into a press opportunity. I stood at the back of the chapel, wearing Grandpa's denim jacket over a black dress, watching them perform Grief like it was another gala invitation. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because the next act was already written, and it was going to be one hell of a scene. If Grandpa's last months were quiet, sacred, and full of meaning, his funeral was the exact opposite. They turned it into a photo op, a stage production. A grotesque pageant of grief designed not to honor him, but to outdo each other. I should have known the moment I pulled into the lot of St. Luke's Episcopal and saw valet parking. Yes, valet parking. For a funeral. Inside, the sanctuary had been transformed into something that felt more like a luxury hotel ballroom than a house of God. There were over a dozen floral arrangements. White lilies, roses, and orchids flown in from Costa Rica, my mother claimed. Grandpa hated lilies, said they smelled like hospitals and lies. The casket? Mahogany with 24-karat gold trim. The pews were filled with people I didn't recognize, lawyers, CEOs, realtors, and socialites who wouldn't have given Grandpa a second glance unless he was writing them a check. The program listed 4 speakers. Only one had actually spoken to Grandpa in the last 5 years. And the music. A live jazz quartet playing smooth Kenny G-style saxophone, while mourners sipped sparkling water and made polite conversation about the market. I sat near the back in the last pew, wearing a black dress I hadn't ironed, and Grandpa's old field jacket over my shoulders. Natalie sat beside me, her expression halfway between disgust and disbelief. "You doing okay?" she whispered, slipping a bottle of water into my hand. "I've been better," I muttered, watching my cousin Avery, who once called Grandpa a crusty old relic, deliver a shaky eulogy about family tradition and moral leadership. Avery never spent more than 10 minutes with Grandpa unless there was a trust fund clause involved. Halfway through the service, my father got up to speak. He adjusted his tie 3 times, blinked dramatically under the spotlight, then launched into a speech so polished it could have been written by a PR firm. William Monroe was a visionary, a titan, a family man. Family man? The same family he bailed out financially for over a decade while they treated him like a burden. The same man they ignored in his final months, except when they needed signatures. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought I might chip a molar. After the service, we all headed to the reception. Not a modest gathering at the house, mind you, but a full-blown catered event at the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom downtown. Crystal chandeliers, shrimp cocktail towers, a jazz trio playing tasteful covers of Hallelujah and Amazing Grace. My mother stood near the entrance in a Chanel dress, shaking hands like a politician, smiling with tears that hadn't once smudged her mascara. She spotted me and swooped in like a hawk in heels. "Jessica, darling," she air-kissed the air beside both my cheeks. We saved you a seat between your father and Aunt Trudy, up front. I'm good back here, I said, nodding to the table near the emergency exit. With Natalie. Her smile twitched, just once. Of course, as you wish. We're just glad you're here. It means the world to your father. She moved on before I could respond, already greeting a new wave of guests with perfectly pitched mourning. I looked around the room, at cousins drinking too fast, uncles arguing over estate tax laws, and distant family friends asking where the money was going. This wasn't grief, this was anticipation, and Grandpa? He would have hated every second. He used to say, I whispered to Natalie, you learn who people really are when money enters the picture. Guess the show's about to start? She replied, nodding toward the corner. There, standing stiff and tight-lipped, was James Blackwell, Grandpa's personal attorney for more than 30 years. He looked out of place among the designer suits and Botox smiles, like a wolf in a room full of sheep dressed as lions. He caught my eye, gave me a barely perceptible nod. $10 says the will reading's going to be biblical, Natalie whispered. More like apocalyptic, I replied. Later that evening, as people were still nibbling hors d'oeuvres and sipping champagne from flutes that probably cost more than my rent, Blackwell called for everyone's attention. The official reading of William Monroe's will, he announced, will be held at my office tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. All named parties will be expected to attend. Dead silence, then a ripple of murmurs. My father tried to look relaxed, but the way his jaw flexed betrayed him. My mother's hand tightened around her clutch like it was the last life raft on a sinking ship. Aunt Trudy looked positively giddy. I nodded to Natalie. I'm going early. You'll need backup, she said. I'll bring donuts. We laughed, quietly. The kind of laugh you let out when you're walking into battle but still pretending you're not afraid. Because the reading of the will wasn't just the next step, it was the trap Grandpa had laid, and every snake in that ballroom. They were already halfway inside it. If the funeral was theater, the will reading was war. Blackwell Associates sat high above downtown Dallas in a glass and steel fortress overlooking the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Mahogany everything, the kind of office where silence carries more weight than words. I arrived 15 minutes early. I don't know why. Maybe to center myself, maybe to prove I wasn't afraid. Natalie came with me, wearing her I dare you face and holding a notepad she didn't actually need, just for intimidation. The conference room was already filling up when we walked in. My parents sat at the head of the table, of course. My father in a navy pinstripe suit, flipping through his phone like he had more important things to do. My mother in black lace and pearls, her hair in a chignon so tight it looked like it could deflect bullets. Aunt Trudy? Cousin Avery, Uncle Ray, people I hadn't seen in years but who'd somehow all made time for this moment. I chose a seat near the back. Natalie sat beside me, cracking open a La Croix. At exactly 10 o'clock, James Blackwell entered the room. He looked like he always did. Gray suit, red bow tie, calm like a man who spent his entire life watching people unravel. He placed a thick leather folder on the table, opened it and adjusted his glasses. Thank you all for coming, he said, voice even and professional. Before we begin, William asked me to express his gratitude for your attendance, despite some of you being less consistent in life than in death. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My mother pursed her lips. Blackwell continued. The will before me was finalized 2 months prior to William Monroe's passing. It is legally binding, witnessed, and filed appropriately with the probate court. He paused, dramatically I might add. The man had timing. Let's begin. The first 20 minutes were standard fare. Grandpa had been generous to people who'd actually meant something to him. His housekeeper, Mrs. Lopez, $25,000 and lifetime rent-free occupancy in the guest cottage. His mechanic of 30 years, $15,000 and the old F-150 he loved more than any Tesla on Earth. Donations to the Wildlife Conservancy, the Texas Natural Land Trust, and the VA hospital in Waco. Aunt Trudy got a small annuity. Uncle Ray got a fishing cabin in Arkansas. Cousin Avery received Grandpa's gun collection, but only the ones that weren't decorative. No one said anything, but I could feel the temperature in the room rising with every clause, because the big stuff hadn't been addressed yet. The estate, the company, the real money, and then it happened. Blackwell cleared his throat, removed a separate envelope, and looked directly at me. "To my beloved granddaughter, Jessica Monroe," he read slowly, "I leave the sum of $20 million to be transferred immediately into a secured trust, accessible solely by her and managed by our office until otherwise directed." Dead silence. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at the polished wood table in front of me and listened to the sound of my parents' world cracking wide open. "What?" my mother whispered. My father leaned forward, voice cold and sharp. "There must be some mistake." Blackwell didn't flinch. "There is no mistake. This is outrageous," my father snapped, standing so fast his chair screeched against the marble floor. "I built Monroe Development. I was the heir apparent." "No," Blackwell replied coolly. "William Monroe was the builder. You were the borrower. If that wasn't a dagger, I don't know what is." "I demand clarification," my mother added, trying to regain her composure. "Why would he leave that amount to Jessica?" Blackwell raised one brow. "Because he trusted her." The room turned toward me like I was the villain in a soap opera, or maybe the twist they hadn't seen coming, and then Blackwell added fuel to the fire. William included a letter, written in his own hand. He handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. "Jess, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're surrounded by people who don't understand a damn thing about what really matters. That's okay. I didn't leave you this money to impress anyone or to save them. I left it because I believe you'll use it for something bigger than yourself. Don't let them guilt you. Don't let them twist your heart. You're the future of this family, even if they don't see it yet. With all my love and trust, Grandpa." My vision blurred. My heart pounded. And then my father spoke. "I want this contested immediately." Blackwell didn't blink. "You're welcome to try, but be aware. William was prepared for that. If the will is challenged, it triggers an automatic clause. The sale of Monroe Development to its employees via an ESOP agreement. The board has already approved it." My father paled. "That's blackmail." "No," Blackwell replied. "That's strategy." The oxygen left the room. The wolves had walked in expecting a feast, but Grandpa had built a fortress, and I was holding the keys. After the will was read, the room emptied like someone had pulled the fire alarm. Some left in stunned silence. Others, like Cousin Avery, stormed out cursing under his breath about entitlement. Aunt Trudy asked if her annuity came with spa credits. And my parents? They didn't move. They just stared at me like I'd stolen something. Blackwell waited until everyone else had gone. Then he turned to me, and only me. "Jessica," he said carefully. "Your grandfather requested a private meeting, just you and your parents, if you're willing." I didn't even have to think. I'm willing. They weren't. But they didn't have a choice. We moved to a smaller office, dark wood, no windows, one long table that felt more like a witness stand than a meeting room. Blackwell laid out 3 folders, one for each of us. My name printed in bold black ink across the front. He opened the first. "These," he began, "are records of financial transactions from the past 15 years. My father crossed his arms. "We've already discussed family transfers. They were agreed upon years ago." "They weren't transfers," Blackwell said, voice like ice. They were loans, formal, signed, with interest, none of which were repaid. He slid a spreadsheet across the table, line after line of withdrawals, bank wires, property liens. Total, $7.8 million. My mother reached for it, then pulled her hand back like it burned. "That can't be accurate," she whispered. "It's conservative," Blackwell replied. "It doesn't include the undocumented uses of company credit or the overseas expenses filed as consulting fees." I felt my pulse spike. My father turned red. "Those were business deductions," he snapped. "The $250,000 yacht?" Blackwell asked. "The casino debts in Monaco? The private helicopter tours in Maui?" "Team-building exercises," my father muttered. My laugh slipped out before I could stop it. They both looked at me, and for the first time I saw them clearly. Not as parents, not even as people, but as addicts. Addicted to status, to image, to control. "Your grandfather knew," Blackwell continued. "He chose not to press criminal charges during his lifetime, out of respect for you." "He covered for you," I added, staring straight at them. "While you lied to his face." My mother finally spoke, her voice small, measured. "Jessica, we never meant for things to get so complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. "You used him like an ATM. You let him rot while you planned ski trips and spa weekends." My father leaned forward. "He gave you everything. You can't seriously believe he meant to cut us out. We were his family." "No," I said quietly. "I was his family. You were a bill." Silence. Then my mother tried a different tactic. "Darling, if we're honest, the trust is too much for you to handle alone. You need guidance, advisors, experience." "I have Blackwell," I said. "And I have integrity. That's more than either of you brought to the table." My father's voice dropped to a growl. "You think you earned that money? You think your little camera and your field boots make you better than us?" "No," I said. "I think how you treated Grandpa proves exactly why you didn't get it." And then Blackwell handed me another envelope. Grandpa's handwriting, inside, more details, bank statements. A full forensic audit, a letter addressed directly to me. "Jess, I let your father dig his own hole." I hoped he'd stop. He didn't. You can bury yourself in guilt, or you can build something better. "This is yours now, but it comes with responsibility. Hold the line. Don't look back. Love, G." I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. "You're right," I told them. "It is too much for me to handle alone." My mother's face lit up, for a second, until I added, "Which is why I'm hiring people who know what they're doing, who care about more than status." "We can fight this," my father warned, rising. "This isn't over." "It is," I replied. "The money's already moved, the trust is locked. And the only thing you'll win by contesting the will is public humiliation." He opened his mouth. Blackwell beat him to it. "If you file a lawsuit," he said calmly, "the full documentation of your debt, misuse of company assets, and falsified expense reports will become public record. You'll lose more than this inheritance." My mother paled. "But we're your parents," she said, almost pleading. I looked at them one last time, and I realized I felt nothing. No rage, no grief. No urge to rescue or punish. Just a clear, clean line between their chaos and my future. "You were," I said. "Now you're just a lesson." Then I walked out. I should have known they wouldn't walk away quietly. Because people like my parents, they don't lose. They adjust. They strategize. They pretend the game isn't over until they find a way to cheat the rules. That's exactly what they tried to do. A few hours after the will reading, I got a call. My father's voice was calm, measured, too calm. "Jessica," he said, "we'd like to speak with you privately." "At the house." By the house, he meant Grandpa's ranch, the place I now legally owned. The same house they'd been squatting in rent-free for nearly 10 years while Grandpa paid the taxes and utilities under the guise of family generosity. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Natalie offered to come. I told her no. I need to do this on my own, I said. She just handed me a pepper spray and said, "Keep your phone on." I arrived at sunset. The ranch looked different, not physically but spiritually, like the air had shifted. It didn't feel like Grandpa's home anymore. It felt like a crime scene that hadn't been discovered yet. They were waiting for me in the study. My father stood near the window, staring out at the pasture like it owed him something. My mother sat on the leather couch, ankles crossed, hands folded in that rehearsed way she used at charity galas. "Jessica," she began, "we've had time to reflect." "Spare me," I said, closing the door behind me. "What do you want?" My father turned. "We want to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. "The fact that Grandpa gave me what you thought you deserved?" His jaw twitched. "We're willing to be reasonable," he said. "If you agree to allocate $10 million to us, we'll consider it a fair split." I laughed. Out loud. "That's not a compromise," I said. "That's blackmail wrapped in manners." My mother stood, smoothing her skirt. "Darling, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. This money, it's not just about you, it's about the family legacy." "Grandpa was the legacy," I said. "You're just the footnotes." My father's face darkened. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "You're emotional, impulsive." "We can contest the will, file for undue influence. Mental incompetence. You'll lose months in court, years maybe, and in the meantime, you'll have nothing." I stepped closer. "Do it," I said. "But just know, if you drag Grandpa's name through the mud, I will make sure every ugly truth about your finances hits the press before the first court date." His nostrils flared. My mother's hands twitched. And then it happened. He lunged for my purse. I reacted too late. The bag was already in his hands, unzipped, my belongings scattered across Grandpa's desk like broken glass. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "Ensuring you make the right decision," he growled. He found it. The check. The ceremonial one Grandpa had insisted be printed and hand-delivered during the will reading. A single piece of cardstock with the words, "Pay to the order of Jessica Monroe, 20,000. My mother stepped beside him, pulling something from her pocket. A silver lighter, the antique one, a gift from some European prince she once tried to seduce into investing in Monroe development. "One last chance," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Give us 10 million, or this burns." "You're bluffing," I whispered. She lit the flame. My father held the check just above it, the edges already curling from the heat. "That money isn't real," I said. "It's a prop. The trust is already sealed." "Then why do you care?" he snapped, and that's when I saw it. They actually believed that piece of paper was their last shot, that if they destroyed it, somehow the money would default back to them, like this was Monopoly and not real life. I watched in stunned disbelief as the check ignited. Flames danced along the signature line. Ash drifted onto the carpet. "No!" I lunged, but my mother blocked me. "Let it go," she said coldly. "You'll thank us someday." The check disintegrated. Gone. Burnt. And for a second they smiled. Victorious. Triumphant. Like they'd just pulled off the perfect heist. I blinked. Then I laughed. At first, just a chuckle. Then a full, chest-shaking laugh that made my ribs ache. "What's so funny?" my father asked, voice tight. I wiped a tear from my eye. "You really think that check mattered?" I said. "You think Grandpa would leave something that important unprotected?" Their smiles faded. "The funds were wired into the trust weeks ago," I said, pulling out my phone. Here, look. I held the screen up. One account, $10 million. Another, $8 million. A third for tax buffers and legal protections. Backup plans, I added, just in case you tried something exactly like this. Blackwell stepped into the room. He wasn't alone. Two security officers followed, dressed in plain clothes but unmistakably alert. "I got the alert," he said. The check was embedded with an RFID tracker, triggered the moment it caught fire. "You were spying on us?" my mother gasped. "No," Blackwell replied. "We were protecting Jessica's inheritance, on Mr. Monroe's direct instruction." He turned to the guards. "Escort them out, effective immediately. Their 30-day grace period on this property is revoked." "You can't do this," my father roared. "This is our home." "No," I said. "It was Grandpa's, and now it's mine." As they were forced from the room, my mother crying, my father cursing, I felt something shift in my chest. Not joy, not vengeance, freedom. They had burned their last bridge, and I hadn't lost a thing. The door slammed behind them, and for the first time in my life, it was quiet. Not awkward silence, not the kind that lingers after a fight. This was peace, a full-bodied, earth-shaking, soul-settling silence that came when chaos left the room and knew it wasn't welcome back. Blackwell turned to me. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said. I didn't answer. I just stared at the place on the desk where the ashes of that check still lingered. Then I brushed them into the trash. It was time to clean house. Literally and metaphorically. Over the next few days, the ranch began to breathe again. My parents were officially removed from all legal ties to the property. Blackwell's firm filed the final ownership papers and the deed was reissued under my name only. Jessica Monroe, not William's granddaughter, not Richard's daughter. Just me. I walked through every room, reclaimed every inch. The grand dining room where my mother once hosted networking brunches turned into a community event space for local conservationists. The wine cellar my father had used to impress investors converted into a climate-controlled photo archive for my wildlife work. And Grandpa's den? That stayed the same. Same old leather chair, same bookshelf, same fishing hat still hanging by the window. That room wasn't mine to redesign, it was his heartbeat, and I wasn't here to erase him. I was here to extend him. The next step was obvious. I founded the William Monroe Wildlife Conservation Foundation. It was something Grandpa and I had dreamed about during those late-night porch talks. A real organization. Not just donations here and there, but a mission. A force, its focus, preserving endangered ecosystems in Texas and across the South. Funding habitat restoration, supporting small environmental researchers who usually get ignored, educating kids about land stewardship and wildlife science. I poured the first $5 million into the foundation myself. Natalie became my operations director. I trusted her with more than finances. I trusted her with vision. She understood what I was trying to build, not an empire, a movement. We hired a team of biologists, photographers, grant writers, and field rangers, set up partnerships with Texas state parks and smaller nonprofits who'd been fighting these battles long before I had the platform to join them. We bought our first 300 acres in Bastrop County, land that had once been slated for commercial development. Instead, it became our first restoration site. Within 6 months, native grasses returned, so did pollinators. So did birds. Every time I walked that land, camera in hand, I felt Grandpa beside me, not haunting, guiding. But legacy isn't just about mission statements and wildlife sanctuaries, it's also about identity. And mine was changing fast. People started calling me an heiress-turned-activist. Reporters wanted to know how it felt to go from broke to multi-millionaire overnight. They asked about fashion, About parties, about what's next. I gave them facts, not gossip. I wore jeans. I drove the same Jeep. I said no to brand endorsements and lifestyle pieces. Because this wasn't a rebrand, it was a rebirth, but not everyone was thrilled. My parents tried to re-enter the picture, quietly at first. An email here, a forwarded article there. Then came the invitation. "We're hosting a legacy dinner," my mother wrote. "We'd love for you to speak. It would mean so much to the Monroe name." I didn't respond. Because the Monroe name didn't need polishing, it needed redefining. That's what I was doing. Brick by brick, photo by photo, acre by acre. One night, I sat on the back porch of the ranch, now renovated and renamed the Sanctuary House, with Natalie and our new science director, Dr. Reed Thompson. The stars were out. Coyotes howled in the distance. We had just finalized a land grant proposal for over 1,000 more acres. "I still can't believe this all came from a funeral," Reed said, shaking his head. "No," I replied. "It came from a man who planted seeds a long time ago, and a girl stubborn enough to water them." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. This legacy, it wasn't about inheritance or revenge, or even justice. It was about planting something that would outlast all of us, so the next generation wouldn't have to fight as hard to find purpose. So some little girl in Texas, obsessed with frogs and field cameras, would see someone like her running things and know she wasn't alone. They say money changes everything, and maybe it does, but in my case, it didn't change me. It revealed what had always been there. I wasn't interested in Bentleys or private islands. I didn't want to be a Texas it girl or have my face plastered across magazine covers titled "Heiress Gone Rogue." I wanted impact. Real, measurable, boots on the ground, mud on your jeans kind of impact. And the foundation gave me that. Within a year, we had preserved over 5,000 acres of critical habitat across Texas. Our team had grown to 15 full-time staff, all passionate, all overqualified, all underpaid by traditional standards, but fulfilled beyond belief. We launched education programs in rural school districts, bringing wildlife science to classrooms where students had never even seen a field camera before. We hosted overnight eco-camps for teenage girls who'd been told science wasn't for them. I watched them set up tracking equipment and outpace the boys by lunchtime. That was the kind of change I'd always dreamed of. Not charity, not handouts, empowerment. And the funny thing about purpose? It's contagious. People started reaching out, not the media types or the social climbers, but the ones who got it. Rangers, teachers, single moms raising conservation-minded kids. Even old rivals, like my cousin Marcus, who shockingly began volunteering at a local youth shelter. But the biggest surprise? Dr. Jason Hale. He came to us through a grant application, proposing a cross-regional study on migratory patterns of lesser-known bat populations. Not exactly the sexy headline stuff. But it was smart, detailed, passionate. And he wasn't interested in my money. When we first met in person, he showed up in a dusty pickup with 3 months of field notes and a shirt that said, "Don't mess with Texas, wildlife." I liked him immediately. He treated me like a colleague, not a benefactor. Argued with me in meetings, rolled his eyes when I called myself a photographer turned pseudo-executive, called me out when I hesitated to approve high-risk, high-reward projects. "You want to make a dent in the world?" he said. "Then stop playing safe." He reminded me of Grandpa, not in looks or background, but in spirit, steady, honest, unimpressed by fluff. We started spending more time together, walking new properties, reviewing research, setting up infrared cameras at dusk. Then coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into laughter, and laughter turned into something I wasn't quite ready to label. Because love, real love, is scary when you've spent your life surrounded by performance, but he wasn't performing, and neither was I. One evening, we were watching bat footage from a monitoring site in the hill country. He turned to me and said, "You know, most people who come into money lose touch with the world." I smirked. "And what about me?" He didn't hesitate. "You became the world." That stopped me cold. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped trying to prove I was different from my parents and just started being who I was. Money hadn't defined me. Purpose had. Grandpa used to say, "True wealth is the freedom to do the right thing, even when it costs you." I'd spent my whole life watching people protect wealth by building walls around their hearts, their names, their reputations, but I wanted to build bridges. Between privilege and responsibility, between inheritance and integrity, and for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I felt like I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. Not because it looked good on paper, but because it felt right in my bones. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of the William Monroe Wildlife Sanctuary, watching a group of third graders point excitedly at a pair of nesting herons. Behind them, the research center buzzed with quiet energy, scientists cataloging data, volunteers tending native plants, a young girl holding a clipboard with more confidence than I'd ever had at her age. This was the legacy Grandpa imagined. And then, I saw them, my parents, standing just beyond the visitor's path, hesitant, out of place, dressed more modestly than I'd ever seen. No entourage, no designer sunglasses, just two people who looked older, smaller, and maybe, just maybe, humbled. I could have turned away, but I didn't. I walked toward them. "Jessica," my mother said, her voice almost fragile. "The sanctuary. It's beautiful." My father nodded. "You've built something real." There was silence. No requests, no conditions, just discomfort. I studied their faces, still familiar, still complicated, and then I said, "You can walk the trails, but not the path back into my life." My mother's eyes shimmered. My father said nothing. "But thank you for coming," I added softly. "That's more than I expected." Then I turned and walked away, toward the foundation team, toward Natalie, toward Jason, toward the future. Because healing doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it's just the power to stand still, while everything that once hurt you keeps walking in the opposite direction. If there's one thing this entire journey taught me, it's this. Wealth isn't what you inherit, it's what you choose to protect. I inherited $20 million, yes, but that was just paper. The real legacy was Grandpa's belief in me. His trust that I'd use my freedom to create something bigger than revenge or reputation. In a world obsessed with image, he chose character. In a family fueled by entitlement, he planted a seed of purpose. And when everything tried to bend me, to break me, to buy me, I chose to build. I built a foundation, a sanctuary, and a future that no one could take away. Not with lawsuits, not with fire, not with bloodlines. Because the truth is, sometimes the greatest act of love is setting a boundary. And the greatest form of loyalty is living up to the values of the person who believed in you when no one else did. So if you're standing at a crossroads, wondering who you owe something to, choose the version of you that future generations will thank. That's where the real inheritance lives. If you suddenly inherited $20 million, but it came with family secrets, betrayal, and a chance to rewrite your legacy, what would you do? Would you walk away, seek revenge, or build something greater? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your take on money, family, and purpose.